Hello and welcome to my workshop. Tonight we're going to be getting started on a set of shelves that my wife asked for, and anytime that Megan has a request for me, I try to honor that so that she lets me keep performing my hobby. So we've got these nice shelves you can see here. They actually sit like this with the bracket going up the wall, and then the shelf will sit inside of this cradle. It's about 6 inches wide. Got plenty of width here on the board. Raise that up to get one out with some extra, or one shelf with some extra left over as scraps. And then they'll be about 22 inches wide. I'll cut these a little bit long. So we're going to go ahead and get started. To begin, we're going to measure out the 6 inches for each bracket and the 22 inches in length for the initial cuts. And I'm going to oversize them to allow for the milling process. I'm going to go to 6.5 inches. On each board. And then I'm going to use a straight edge to just mark this out. It doesn't have to be perfect, as these will be going through the joiner and the planer after this. I marked the section that I'm not keeping. Now for the length, I'm going for approximately 22 inches. I will allow some room for snipe on my planer, and I'll go about 27 inches. 27 inches. And again, we're not going for high precision in this case. So I'm going to use a framing square to roughly give me my line. Now that I have my parts laid out, we're going to go to the bandsaw. For this cut, I've got my bandsaw set up with the fence at approximately the 6.5 inch mark that I made. On the board, I'm using a 1/4 inch 4-tooth per inch blade, which should be more than adequate. Now that we have separated the extra, a couple of nice boards there for another project from the main shelves, I could take them over to the miter saw right over here and trim them down to the 27-inch length before running them across my milling machines. Now that I've got my rough pieces cut to length and width, I can run them across my joiner to establish one flat reference face and then true up another edge for the 90. And I'm going to wait to run it through the planer and the table saw to square this up until tomorrow, after I can talk with Megan to make sure that I've got the thickness of this board set to her liking. You'll also notice that on this face, I'm a little bit proud because it was wider than my joiner. I'll clean that up with my hand plane. Now that the boards are flat on one end, jointed on the other, I can flatten out the third face before running it through the table saw to give me my final width. make one more pass on my jointer because I noticed that the edges are not quite parallel or perpendicular after making that final pass through the joint or through the planer. In order to do that, I've got these nifty welding squares. They're magnetic, they're 90 degrees. I put it on the bed, reference onto the fence till everything meets, and I'll do the same on the other side. And lock it in place. Checking it for 90, dead on. With three sides square and true, I can now trim up the rough edge to the final dimensions for my shelf bracket. I measured 6 1/8, or just shy, so I'll cut it at 6 1/8, and then I'll fit it down with a hand plane. To make the cuts on the table saw, I'm first going to raise my blade, my cut height, and move my fence, my table saw into position at 6 1/8 inches. Perform a quick dummy check to make sure all my measurements work out. Subtracting the kerf width, I'll be just over the required width for my bracket. Here I'm going to cut the shelves to their final length of 20 inches on the miter saw. pipe clamp moxon vise in place, I can now hand plane this down to the final thickness that I need in order to fit inside of my shelf brackets. To do that, I'll be using my trusty Lee Nelson number 62. Final detail, if I can show it well enough, is to chamfer these corners so it fits into the bottom of the bracket and flush. To cut the chamfers, I'm going to use my Lee Nelson number 62 block plane. Laid out some marking lines as references, and those are just eyeballed. They don't need to be perfect. And we'll just cut these corners, not literally, until we make it to my line. If you don't have a block plane, you can use a router, a knife, a spoke shave, a whole lot of different items. I just enjoy the simple pleasure of using a hand plane to tune up a piece of wood. Switch sides, start again. Go a little bit deeper cut. Remember to keep checking to my reference line. And now we'll check the fit. Just like that. Nice, flush, chamfered edges. Very pretty. And now I'll just go around the remainder of the block, the shelf, and do some light chamfers to soften up the feel of the piece. Just a few passes will do. Feel it. Love it. Be careful when doing the end grain. When you transition off of the edge, you don't want to tear it out. If you're not comfortable with your hand plane, come in from the other side. With this low angle block plane, I've never had a problem. Just tear out as long as I move slowly and deliberately. One last edge. Keeping the block plane at a slight angle so it provides more of a slicing, then a cutting motion also helps prevent tear. And make sure we got all the corners. I missed one. And there we go. One shelf ready for sanding. Now that the shelves have been trimmed to size and fitted with my hand planes to the brackets, I'm going to use my card scraper to get the finishing process started, followed up with a light pass of some 220 grit sandpaper. There are many aspects of woodworking that I find to be very enjoyable and very liberating, where you can just get lost in the task and you can get lost in the shavings, and none more than cleaning up some wood with a nice card scraper. The added benefit to using a card scraper is this particular shelf has some really nice curl figure here on the end, and the card scraper will actually bring that figure out more once the finish is applied. So we'll be able to enjoy it when these are hanging on the shelf or hanging on the wall. Those shavings are just absolutely amazing. Just got to take a break to look at these. They're so thin. And it's amazing that all it comes from is the metal being burred over or rolled over on the end just enough to catch the wood and separate it. Such a simple tool. So effective. And now for everybody's favorite part, ye old sandpaper. Again, just doing a light sanding here because the card scraper really did most of the work. So all I'm doing is kind of knocking down the edges, smoothing things out just a little bit. Nothing too crazy. I feel like Bob Ross over here. Just a happy little piece of sandpaper on my happy little piece of ash, making my happy little shelves that are just gonna rest easy on the walls in the bathroom and observe the unspeakable tales that unfold on pizza and wing night, or better yet, the day after pizza and wing night. You know what I'm talking about. And if not, consider yourself lucky. chance I already did that side. Sometimes you just lose track of what's going on. These simple repetitive motions, simple repetitive tasks. Doing a thing. No brain power involved. The edges and the corners. Nice light sanding on the end grain. And now, my friends, we're just about ready to apply the finish. Bring these things to life. 2 coats. I'm going to be using Osmopolix for this satin finish. That takes about 24 hours to dry, so we're going to do a little bit of waiting, unfortunately. I'd like to get these done. Part of the process. You want it to look pretty, you've got to do it right. Get this end grain down to a nice flat surface, which is oftentimes harder than it sounds. This end grain doesn't really sand that well. But we'll get there, nice and slow. I could have used my random orbital sander, easy for you to say, on this particular part. But the pieces are small enough and I don't feel like dealing with the dust and the noise that comes with it. The kids are asleep, so we're going to avoid that. So now, that's 2 nicely finished shelves. We're going to set up and prepare to apply finish. Now that we're done sanding, we can take a break. Just enjoy the view. Or we can get the finish applied. As mentioned, I'm using Osmopolix. It's a satin finish. Really easy to apply, oil finish, very durable, as far in my experience, at any rate.